This is day 6 of recording myself to improve my speech. Through the speech practice series so far, we've been tackling two books, Psychology of Money and The School of Life. Having finished both of them, I've decided that the last speech practice of the year 2023 is going to be a book review covering the two books that this series started with. Starting off, as we always do, with The School of Life. I have to say, I derived great value out of this book. The way this book offers that value is not by providing answers as such, although it does have some great insights. The real charm of this book is by prompting you to think how your life right now is and how you might change it, and that you should be concerned about changing some parts of it at all. So, through various sectors of life, different questions are asked, different ideas explored, and an overall sense of reflectiveness and introspection is encouraged. We started off by talking about the self, difficulty of self-knowledge, and the traumas of childhood and how they might be affecting us to this day. Then we talked about others, which grew very naturally from talking about the self, talked about the self in relation to others and others themselves. A large chunk of the book then dedicates itself to talking about relationships, which makes sense. The biggest dynamic that is at play from day-to-day life is our interactions with people and the physical and mental things that couple with those relationships that we have. Then we talked about, what was it? Work. Yes, because outside of that dimension, as all of us young adults, new adults are experiencing, we enter the workforce, and then there's a whole new dimension that's attached to this new facet of life. And we concluded with talking about culture. This is a book where you might disagree with some parts and some points by the author. You might have some views that you already hold clearly articulated on paper, and therefore the psychological clarity of the author is transferred over to you, and you might gain new insights as well. I would recommend that if you are going to read this book, you read it in the way that I did through the speech practice. That is to say, a few pages at a time, then you put the book down and you really think about it. This is not a book to be finished in 1, 2, or 3 sittings. You could. It is not a long book by any short. It's like 232 odd pages, but then the book loses all its value. So I highly encourage, first of all, I highly recommend that you do read this book. Alain de Botton is a good writer. He will get you to introspect. And it doesn't matter if you agree with the book or you disagree with the book. The psychological clarity is what the true worth of this book is. So there's that for School of Life. Moving on to the Psychology of Money. I think we can have a localized discussion about this book. I'm an Indian myself and come from a middle class background. Now there's a certain set of sensibilities that one grows up with when you have this kind of a background. It's very natural for us to grow up with a mindset of frugality, of knowing that it's a virtue to save, and that wherever respect might lie, one place it does not lie in is by buying riches and securing respect that way. Now, this is the opening act of Psychology of Money. This is the things I just talked about. What I feel is the first half of the book that encourages you to do some basics. Do not do things that lead to ruin. Save money. Compound interest and its importance. Those things are almost second nature to a middle class Indian, or at least in my conception, it is pretty much common sense. We are all very risk averse because our parents at least have seen many hardships. They've seen what ruin, what lack of resources looks like, and they have this um, tendency to avoid ruin which they pass down onto us. So in the beginning, I did not have a very positive view of the book because I felt it was expressing in very good words, very clear words, things that I already understood somehow. It's the second half of the book that was really valuable for me and would be if you belong to a similar demographic or have a similar risk averse mindset, where it talked about investing. Now, neither I nor anyone in my family has any background in investing, and the only thing I'd heard tangentially from my parents was essentially it's like gambling and that you should avoid it. It's gonna lose you money, it's not worth it, we're never gonna do it. Now, stepping all the way from that fringe end of the spectrum to a moderate understanding of, well, here are the facts, here's what people do, here are the risks. Now, can we explain the psychology behind it? Can we have a sane and rational way of going through it such that this, the kernel of truth present in my parents and other middle class people's risk averse mindset, the kernel of truth in that is also taken into account, yet we are also progressive and taking into account the other side of the spectrum. The very final chapter of Psychology of Money talks about the author's personal financial decisions themselves. So he talks about how, well, people give advice, but many times it turns out they are the last people who follow their own advice. He gives a very funny example of mutual fund managers who, despite managing their own mutual funds, they don't have a single cent invested in those mutual funds. So the delta can exist in what people advocate and what they actually do. So I think that chapter was the real gold mine that the whole book was building up to. So if by chance, I know this is a very famous book, if by chance you have a copy of Psychology of Money and you haven't read it, I'd at least tell you to dust it off your shelf and read the final chapter, because that is the condensed version of both worlds of the encouraging saving, compound interest, and the progressive investing, yet still taking in mind how do we ruin averse but still taking moderate amounts of risk. Now, I haven't started earning yet. However, I think there were certain learnings or at least certain mindsets around money that I'm permanently going to carry over from this book. So I would say it was worth my time, even though the first half I felt was pretty obvious. So with that in mind, actually for once, a very popular self-help book turned out to be worth its popularity. So if you are someone, and I know those people exist, who simply turn their faces away from a book because it's best-selling, it's self-help, and so on, I'd recommend you make an exception here with Psychology of Money. It's actually, unless you happen to have all these intuitions by yourself, good parenting, good background, and so on, unless you do have that, then this book is going to be worth your time. So that was the conclusion of these two books. It's been a fantastic time recording these speech practices. I definitely feel more confident in my ability to express myself. It's also been manifesting in my daily life. And as we move into the new year, I wish to do something new. Maybe move past speech practice, do some new projects, do something interesting that facilitates this articulation ability anyways, but does something more interesting on top of that. So I'll see you guys in the new year.